Jungkook falls silent when Taehyung speaks on trust. During a tense broadcast, what secrets lie beneath their unspoken words? Trust means everything. Even when silence screams louder than betrayal, the words rang out under the blinding studio lights, sharp and sudden, like a gunshot in a room that had been holding its breath too long. Taehyung sat forward in his seat, his voice calm but threaded with something deeper, something unreadable to the untrained eye. The cameras were rolling. The broadcast was live, and the air felt like it might shatter if anyone so much as blinked. Jungkook didn't. He stayed still. Too still. The host chuckled, awkward and misplaced. That's a deep answer, Taehyung-si. Jungkook-si. What about you? Do you agree? Pause. Jungkook looked down at his hands, resting neatly in his lap. Fingers curled tightly into his palms, knuckles pale. He said nothing. The silence spread like ink in water. Taehyung didn't look at him. He didn't need to. He knew. They all knew. After the cameras cut, the applause sign blinked out. Staff began shuffling around, brushing past them with headsets and clipboards. But Jungkook remained seated, chest barely moving, eyes still down. Taehyung stood and walked past him slowly, not stopping. Not this time. Backstage, the hallway lights buzzed overhead. The makeup room mirror still held smudges from earlier. Half-erased notes in eyeliner scrawled across the corner. Jungkook entered and locked the door. He leaned against it and finally exhaled, long and trembling, like he'd been underwater. On the counter lay his phone. Its screen cracked from a fall no one had seen. The notification still there, unread, unopened, threatening. Taehyung's voice haunted him even here. Trust doesn't mean sharing everything. Sometimes it means waiting until the silence breaks you. Jungkook turned the faucet on and let cold water fill the sink. He plunged his hands in, knuckles still clenched. Like washing them could take away more than just the sweat and grime. He was tired. Not physically. The kind of tired that burrows beneath skin and behind the eyes. The kind of tired that came from holding something so long you forgot what it meant to feel light. Because trust wasn't the absence of secrets. It was the presence of courage. And he hadn't had it. 2 days earlier, in a van driving through the night after rehearsal, Taehyung had asked him the question he feared most. Was it you who told them? The silence then had been the same, and just as loud, he hadn't denied it. He hadn't confirmed it. He'd just looked out the window and watched Seoul's neon lights blur like wounds in the rain. Now, Taehyung was speaking in metaphors on national broadcasts, and Jungkook was sinking beneath them. In the dorm, the rest of the members said little. They felt it how the room fractured in invisible lines whenever the two were near. Jimin kept glancing between them during meals. Namjoon tried once to bring up the tension, but Jungkook brushed it off with a joke. Yoongi didn't ask anything, but his eyes followed Jungkook with a quiet weight, like he was cataloging all the unsaid things. Hoseok had been the only one honest enough to say it aloud. You should tell him, even if it ruins everything. He deserves that. But the fear had rooted in Jungkook's chest, sharp and frozen. Because what if telling the truth didn't just ruin everything, but proved that Taehyung had been right to stop looking at him the way he used to? He remembered when they'd trusted each other without thought. When they'd sneak out to rooftops just to talk about dreams and sky and freedom. When they had each other's passwords, not because they needed them, but because they had nothing to hide. But things changed. Fame came with contracts. Fame came with surveillance. Fame came with fear. And Jungkook had made a choice. That choice had protected someone else, but it had cost Taehyung. Now, every time Taehyung spoke about trust, it felt less like a philosophy and more like a warning, a mirror held up to Jungkook's face that he couldn't bear to look into. Later that week, during dance practice, their choreography brought them face to face again. Briefly. Just for a beat. A flicker. Taehyung's gaze didn't linger. Jungkook flinched anyway. The music blared. Sweat pooled, and the beat moved on like nothing was wrong. Until break time, when the music cut and the room emptied for air, Jungkook stayed back, towel over his neck, Heart louder than the speakers had been, he stared at Taehyung's reflection in the wall-length mirror. Taehyung didn't speak. He just stood by the door, back to him, still. You were right, Jungkook whispered finally. I should have told you. Taehyung turned his head slightly. Only slightly, and for the first time in weeks, their eyes met not across a stage, not across a room, but with nothing between them but air and pain. Why didn't you? Taehyung asked. Jungkook swallowed. Because I didn't want to lose you. The answer lingered like smoke. Taehyung's jaw clenched. His eyes softened and hardened again, all in 1 second. Then he nodded once, not in understanding, but in finality. You already did. And he walked out, the door closing, with the softest, cruelest click Jungkook had ever heard. The silence returned, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was filled with everything he didn't say. The door had closed, but the echo of Taehyung's words still rang in Jungkook's ears, sharp, precise, irreversible. You already did. He stood alone in the practice room long after the others had left, the lights humming faintly overhead, casting sterile white across the mirrors. His reflection didn't move. It stared back with an expression he barely recognized, any more tired, hollowed out, and afraid. There were no cameras now, no stage, just him and the growing weight in his chest. Jungkook sat down on the floor, pressing his back to the cool mirror. He pulled his knees close, resting his forehead on them. For a moment, everything around him ceased to matter. The city beyond the walls, the music still faintly playing on someone's forgotten speaker, the questions that waited like wolves behind his locked lips. He wished he could go back. Not to fix everything, just to speak just once before silence had made a home inside him. The betrayal hadn't been loud. There were no raised voices, no thrown objects, just decisions made in fear. Jungkook had protected someone's identity, an anonymous tip-off to the agency about a leak within the crew. He never said who, never even told Taehyung it was him. He thought it wouldn't matter, that as long as the problem was handled, trust would remain intact. But it didn't, because Taehyung found out. Not the details, but just enough. And when trust is cracked, even silence becomes guilt. The following morning, Taehyung walked into the studio like nothing had happened. Sunglasses on, phone in hand, his expression unreadable. He greeted the staff, smiled politely, nodded at the director. Jungkook watched from across the room as Taehyung took his seat beside the interviewer again, just like they had the day before. Only this time, they were positioned on opposite ends. The shoot was for a documentary-style segment, one that promised fans a rare, unfiltered look into their lives, their friendships, their unbreakable bond. The irony wasn't lost on Jungkook. During a break, the producer approached him. Would you feel comfortable sharing something personal? Maybe about what trust means to you? It'll give fans more to connect with. Jungkook hesitated, eyes flicking over to Taehyung, who stood at the refreshment table, back turned. I don't think I should be the one to answer that, Jungkook murmured. Later, when filming resumed, the interviewer's next question was simple. Too simple. Taehyung, you spoke yesterday about trust. Do you think it can ever be rebuilt after it's broken? Taehyung didn't even blink. If you're asking whether I believe in forgiveness, he said slowly, then the answer is yes. But trust is not the same as forgiveness. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Forgiveness is a gift, Taehyung continued. But trust is earned, again and again, through actions, through truth. He looked toward the camera, but everyone in the room knew those words were not for the lens. Jungkook stayed quiet. That night, they rode back in the same van. The air between them buzzed with everything unsaid. Jimin sat between them, headphones in, pretending not to notice, but even he leaned slightly to the side, body language shaped by discomfort. When they reached the dorms, Jungkook lingered outside. The air was cool, the sky wide open and black. He stared at the stars, wondering how many nights like this they'd shared before, laughing on rooftops, talking about music and meaning and growing up. Taehyung stepped out beside him. For a second, they just stood there, breathing the same cold air, their shoulders almost brushing. I didn't mean for this to happen, Jungkook said. I know, Taehyung replied. But it did. I was trying to protect someone So you chose them over me. Jungkook turned toward him, voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a choice. It felt like survival. Taehyung's laugh was bitter and soft. Survival at the cost of trust? Jungkook didn't answer. Taehyung glanced at him then. Really looked. Not with anger. Not with disappointment. But with quiet hurt, the kind that didn't need to shout to be devastating. You know the worst part? Taehyung said. You never even gave me the chance to understand. I was afraid if I told you, you'd look at me differently. Taehyung took a step closer. And now you don't look at me at all. They didn't speak for the next few days. Not in words. Their communication became movement choreography on stage, handoffs of microphones, nods of acknowledgement in rehearsal. But it was rehearsed, not real. The fans noticed. They always did. Edits started appearing online compilations of interactions. Side-by-side videos of moments where they used to laugh together, now replaced by glances that never met. The hashtag trended for hours. What happened between them? Neither of them answered, until one night, during a live stream, Taehyung was asked directly. He paused, looked at the comments flying by, then said, Trust is a funny thing. You never realize how fragile it is until it breaks. Jungkook was watching from his room, screen brightness low, volume almost off. He sat in the dark, his reflection faint in the glass of the window. The lights of Seoul blinked outside, indifferent. He didn't cry, but something inside him closed. Later that week, they had a group fan meeting event. It was meant to be casual games, laughter, playful banter. They sat on stools across the stage, lights warm, music low. Taehyung was seated at one end, Jungkook at the other. When a fan asked, What do you value most in each other? Silence fell. The members smiled, joked, tried to deflect, but the question lingered like smoke. Finally, Jungkook took the mic. He didn't look at Taehyung when he spoke. I value how he sees through people, even when they don't want to be seen. Taehyung didn't respond, but his fingers curled slightly against the mic he held. After the event, Jungkook found himself back in the practice room. Again, the same spot, same mirror. Taehyung entered without knocking. They stared at each other, tension coiling like a storm about to break. Why do you keep coming back here? Taehyung asked. Because it's where I feel the most honest. Taehyung stepped closer. Then say it. Jungkook inhaled shakily. I'm sorry. Say more. I hurt you. I let silence speak for me when I should have spoken for you. I thought I was protecting someone, but I forgot that trust doesn't survive in shadows. Taehyung looked at him, chest rising and falling, and for the first time, he let the silence sit without anger. It was a beginning, not of resolution, but of something new. Because trust, once broken, doesn't return in grand gestures. It returns in small truths, spoken softly, in rooms where silence once ruled. And for Jungkook and Taehyung, maybe that was enough for now. The studio lights had long since dimmed, and the echoes of laughter and applause faded into the quiet of the building's steel bones. Most had gone home. The scent of coffee from the break room still lingered in the air, faint and bitter, clinging to the silence like an aftertaste of the day's pretense. Jungkook remained alone in the practice room, one hand pressed against the cool mirror, as if trying to steady himself against something invisible. His reflection stared back, distant, unreadable, exhausted. His heart thudded not from dance or exertion, but from the heaviness that clung to every breath, every thought. Behind him, the door clicked softly, and he knew without turning who it was. The only person who walked into a room without needing permission, yet always carried a storm inside him. Taehyung didn't say anything at first. The door shut with a whisper, and his footsteps came to a halt just inside. The air shifted. Jungkook didn't move. He waited. I didn't come to fight, Taehyung finally said. His voice calm, but lined with tension, like a taut wire before it snaps. Jungkook nodded once, but didn't turn. Neither did I. They stood like that for a long moment, one facing the mirror, the other facing his back. Two people in the same room, but a world apart. I've been thinking, Taehyung continued, his tone quieter now, almost hesitant, about everything. The silence, the way you looked when I asked you that question in the van, How you didn't answer? How you always don't. Jungkook finally turned to face him. Taehyung looked tired, too. There were shadows under his eyes, and his usual armor confidence, charm, sharp wit was absent. In its place was vulnerability, raw and almost painful to witness. I'm not good with confrontation, Jungkook admitted, voice low. Especially not with you. Taehyung stepped closer, expression unreadable. Then be bad at it, but at least be honest. Jungkook met his gaze, something fragile, flickering in his eyes. You want the truth? Taehyung nodded once. I didn't tell you because I thought I could handle the consequences alone, Jungkook said, each word deliberate. I thought if I kept it buried, if I carried the weight quietly, no one would get hurt. But I was wrong. The silence didn't protect anyone. It just pushed you away. There was a beat of silence between them, heavy with unspoken memories. The nights they shared secrets under street lamps, the quiet smiles during rehearsals, the way Taehyung used to call his name, full of warmth. And the leak? Taehyung asked softly. I knew who it was, Jungkook confessed. A staff member. Someone close to all of us. They were being blackmailed. I gave the agency just enough to protect them, without exposing them completely. But it meant lying by omission. To you. Taehyung's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. He sat down slowly on the wooden floor, legs folding beneath him, and leaned back against the mirror. Jungkook joined him, the floor cold beneath their skin. They stared ahead, eyes fixed on the room's opposite wall. For a while I hated you, Taehyung said after a long pause. Not because of what you did, but because you didn't trust me with the truth. I didn't even trust myself, Jungkook whispered. Taehyung looked over at him. Do you now? Jungkook swallowed. I'm trying. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. Outside, distant traffic hummed like a lullaby. Neither of them spoke for a while, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It didn't suffocate. It didn't accuse. It simply existed. Shared. Trust isn't just about telling the truth, Taehyung said eventually. It's about giving someone the power to hurt you and believing they won't. I was afraid you would, Jungkook admitted. Taehyung didn't deny it. He looked away. Maybe I would've, at first, but I would've understood. Eventually, Jungkook nodded slowly. I know that now. Later that night, they left the building together. The city was cold, and their breath hung like ghosts in the air. They didn't speak as they walked side by side, but every step felt like a repair. Small, shaky, but real. In the days that followed, things didn't magically fix themselves. There were still long silences, occasional stares that held too many layers to decode, and awkward glances during interviews. But there were also new things, quiet check-ins, hands brushing accidentally, shared coffees without needing to talk. During a late-night rehearsal, Jimin played a song without warning an unreleased track Taehyung had been working on. Everyone turned toward the speakers in surprise, but it was Jungkook's face that changed the most. You weren't supposed to hear this yet, Taehyung said, clearly flustered. Jungkook smiled faintly. You wrote it after? Yeah. The lyrics were quiet, reflective, raw. Jungkook listened in silence, his throat tight. When it ended, he walked over to Taehyung and didn't speak. Instead, he pulled him into a brief, silent hug. Taehyung didn't resist. When they pulled away, there were no grand declarations, no tearful apologies. Just a nod, an understanding, a start. Weeks passed. Their schedules grew busier. Life pushed forward, but the space between them grew warmer again. One night, during a group live broadcast, a fan asked, "What's the most important lesson you've learned about each other?" Jungkook looked over at Taehyung, who was already watching him. He smiled. That even silence carries meaning, Jungkook said. But it should never replace the truth. Taehyung grinned. And that trust, once broken, doesn't have to stay broken. The fans cheered. Later, after the broadcast, they walked out into the night together. The stars above them mirrored the city lights below, and the streets were quiet. I still don't forgive myself, Jungkook said, voice low. Taehyung glanced over. That's okay. I'm starting to forgive you. Maybe that's enough. Jungkook looked at him, eyes glinting under the glow of the street lamp. Do you think we'll be okay? Taehyung didn't answer right away. He watched a car pass by, its headlights sweeping over their shadows. I think we already are, he said finally. And for the first time in a long time, Jungkook believed it. Under the soft, flickering streetlights, their shadows stretched long on the pavement parallel, close, yet never quite touching. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was still, like a quiet breath after a storm. The kind of silence that no longer asked for answers, but offered space for something fragile to grow again. Taehyung kicked at a pebble with the toe of his boot, watching it skid forward and disappear into the curb. Jungkook walked beside him, hands buried in his jacket pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. They had walked these streets 100 times before after late-night rehearsals, after exhausting performances, after heartbreaks that had nothing to do with each other. But this walk felt different. Neither of them said it, but both of them felt it. A few blocks down, they turned into a quieter street, one lined with old cafes closed for the night, and warm lights spilling from distant apartment windows. Taehyung paused near a stone bench outside a familiar bakery. The kind they used to sneak out to back when curfews were strict and freedom tasted like powdered sugar and burnt coffee. He sat without speaking, resting his forearms on his thighs. Jungkook hesitated, then joined him. The cold was biting, but not unbearable. They could hear the hum of the city, even from here, cars in the distance, laughter from someone's balcony, the quiet sigh of wind weaving through the narrow street. Remember when we got caught sneaking out for donuts? Taehyung asked, his voice colored with a hint of a smile. Jungkook's lips curved. Namjoon lectured us for 40 minutes. You fell asleep sitting up. Taehyung laughed under his breath. I wasn't asleep. I was meditating. Sure you were, Jungkook muttered, eyes soft with memory. They fell quiet again. But this time it wasn't avoidance. It was comfort. After a moment, Taehyung turned slightly toward him, voice gentler. Why didn't you ever tell anyone it was you who exposed the leak? Not even the managers. I didn't want credit for doing the right thing, Jungkook said, then hesitated. And I didn't want them to ask me why I stayed silent about the rest. Taehyung watched him carefully. You mean, about me? No, Jungkook said, then sighed. I mean, about everything. I didn't just keep quiet about the leak. I shut down on everyone. You, Jimin, the staff. I thought if I just kept going, kept working, I wouldn't have to deal with what I was feeling. Taehyung leaned back, his breath visible in the night air. And what were you feeling? Guilt, shame, fear. Jungkook's voice cracked slightly, the words unraveling faster now. I was scared of disappointing you, of watching our friendship fall apart and knowing I caused it. I thought I could fix it quietly. I was wrong. Taehyung looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that saw past the face and into the quiet corners beneath it. Then he spoke, slowly. Do you think you can forgive yourself? Jungkook didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the stars, then closed his eyes. I think I can try. If I know I haven't lost you. Taehyung was silent for a long beat. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled note. He held it out to Jungkook. I wrote this the day I found out, he said. I wasn't going to give it to you, but maybe you should see it now. Jungkook unfolded the note with careful fingers. The handwriting was rushed, uneven. There were scribbles where words had been crossed out, emotions too messy to contain. I want to scream at you. I want to forget you. I want to undo every memory we ever made. But more than anything, I want to believe this isn't who you are. I want to believe you're still the person who used to wait up for me when I was late. Who used to write lyrics with me until sunrise, who used to look me in the eyes without flinching. I want to believe in you, but you're making it so hard. Jungkook's hands trembled slightly as he folded the paper back up. His throat tightened. I'm still that person, he whispered. I just got lost for a while. Taehyung didn't reply with words. Instead, He placed a hand on Jungkook's shoulder, firm and steady. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was something else. Acknowledgement, maybe, a signal that they were not beyond repair. Days passed, then weeks. They returned to schedules, to cameras, to music. But something had shifted. Slowly, gently, they began to talk again. Not just in interviews or rehearsals, but in quiet car rides and late-night studio sessions. They sat side by side during meetings again. They began to laugh. Not the hollow, performative kind, but the real, unfiltered kind that curled at the corners of their mouths and stayed there. One evening, during a live Q&A with fans, a question popped up on screen. What does trust mean to you now? Taehyung read it aloud, then looked over at Jungkook, eyebrow raised in silent invitation. Jungkook cleared his throat, thoughtful. I think trust isn't just about never being hurt. It's about knowing that, even if you are, the person will fight to earn you back. Taehyung nodded slowly. And that they won't disappear when it gets hard. There was a pause. Jungkook smiled. That too, the fans watching flooded the comments with hearts and crying emojis. But beneath the surface-level interactions, something had healed, something deeper than public image, more intimate than reputation. That night, after the live ended and the staff cleared out, Taehyung lingered behind in the studio. Jungkook joined him, hands tucked into his sleeves, hair damp from the snow that had started falling outside. Do you ever think about who we were back then? Jungkook asked. All the time, Taehyung said. But I also think about who we're becoming now. And I like them better. They smiled at each other. And it wasn't forced. Later, when Jungkook was alone in the dorm, he pulled out the note Taehyung had given him. He read it again, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside his bed. He didn't need the words anymore, but he wanted to remember how far they'd come. Not long after, they were preparing for a comeback. The theme was raw, honest, real.
The team suggested that one of the lead songs could feature spoken word interludes, something personal. Jungkook was hesitant at first, but one night he sat in the recording booth and asked to be alone. Then he closed his eyes and spoke. I used to think silence was protection, that if I kept everything inside I could control the outcome, but all it did was build walls between me and the people I loved. This is me breaking them down, one word at a time. When the final track was released, fans wept. The interlude became one of the most quoted lyrics in fan letters and social posts. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, but it starts with a voice that once stayed quiet, finally choosing to speak, and another voice choosing to stay and listen. Taehyung and Jungkook kept walking that road. Some days were smooth, others weren't, but they kept showing up, in practice rooms, on stages, in each other's quiet moments. Because forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering and still choosing to hold out your hand. And this time they both did. Underneath the bluish glow of the recording booth lights, Jungkook's voice lingered long after the interlude had ended. The studio was silent now, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but full. Full of weight, full of release, full of something that had waited too long to be spoken. He sat in the swivel chair, headphones still around his neck, eyes fixed on the dim control panel outside the glass. No one disturbed him. No one needed to. The moment had been his, and he had finally claimed it. Across the building, Taehyung leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, listening through the monitor. He hadn't told Jungkook he would stay to hear it. He didn't have to. When the first few words filtered in, low, steady, trembling in their honesty, Taehyung closed his eyes, not to block anything out but to feel it more fully. The past few months had been a lesson in undoing silence, undoing pride, undoing everything they had unknowingly built between them. Brick by brick, silence by silence, they had created a wall, believing it was protection. What they hadn't realized was that protection sometimes looked like distance, and distance, left too long, becomes something else entirely. But now Jungkook had spoken, not just in lyrics but in truth, in exposure, in an offering that could be rejected or embraced, and Taehyung had made his choice. Later that night, they sat on the rooftop of the dorm, the cityscape stretched around them in every direction, as if the world had widened again just for them. Jungkook wore a hoodie pulled over his head, breath fogging in the cool night air. Taehyung sat with his knees up, chin resting on them, a blanket draped over both their legs that neither had questioned when Jungkook quietly unfolded it and laid it between them. They hadn't said much since the studio. They didn't need to. But now, as the silence settled and the stars blinked high above the city, Jungkook's voice broke through, soft and slow. I thought letting you go would make it easier to live with myself. Taehyung didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the skyline. Did it? Jungkook shook his head, his breath trembling. It made it worse. Taehyung drew in a breath, held it, then exhaled like he'd been waiting to hear those words for too long. I wanted to hate you, he said quietly. I really tried. Jungkook's lips parted slightly, but he didn't speak. Taehyung finally turned to him. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired, raw. But every time I remembered the bad stuff, I'd also remember the night you stood in the pouring rain because I forgot my umbrella, or the way you used to fall asleep with your head on my shoulder on tour buses, or how you used to share your stage water with me without thinking. I still would, Jungkook whispered. I know, Taehyung said. A car passed far below, headlights sweeping the walls of the nearby buildings. The city breathed, uncaring, while two boys who had once trusted each other with everything tried to rebuild a foundation from fractured pieces. I'm not asking you to forget, Jungkook said after a moment. I'm just asking you to believe in me again, even a little. Taehyung looked at him long and hard, then with a quiet exhale he nodded. Okay. That single word was enough to split Jungkook open, not in pain, but in relief. They stayed on that rooftop until their fingers turned numb and the moon sank behind the buildings. When they finally climbed down, they didn't walk apart. Their shoulders brushed. They didn't flinch. In the following weeks, something subtle began to return. During rehearsals, their movements became fluid again, not just technically, but emotionally. Their steps began to echo one another's rhythm, instinctively timed like they once had been. Staff noticed it. So did the members, but no one said anything. Sometimes healing is quiet. During interviews, when one of them spoke, the other would watch, not with guarded eyes, but with something softer. Trust wasn't fully back, not yet, but it was visible now, like sunlight beneath thin clouds. Jimin, one afternoon, cornered them both in the dressing room, arms crossed and eyes sharp. You know, he said, watching the two of you pretend everything's normal was exhausting. Taehyung raised an eyebrow. We're not pretending anymore. Jungkook smiled faintly. We're working on it. Jimin relaxed, then nodded. Good, because I missed this. So did they. Their comeback performance was different this time, not in choreography or styling, but in energy. When they stood side by side during the bridge, eyes briefly meeting under the stage lights, the fans noticed. The fancam slowed down. Edits exploded online. Their back trended in 5 countries. But the truth was they weren't back. They were somewhere new, something better. One evening, while filming behind-the-scenes content, Taehyung and Jungkook were asked a question from a fan card. What would you tell each other if this was your last day as BTS? The room went still. Jungkook blinked slowly. That's a hard one. Taehyung smiled. Good, we deserve hard questions. Jungkook turned to him, breathing out. I'd tell you I'm sorry for every word I didn't say, for every moment I let fear win. Taehyung swallowed. I'd tell you I'm proud of you, Jungkook continued. Not just for the person you are on stage, but for the person you are when no one's watching. Taehyung didn't look away. And I'd tell you that you're more than your mistakes, that I see you, still, always. The room was quiet. The camera kept rolling. Later, when the clip aired, fans wept, but not because of the drama, because of the healing. Jungkook and Taehyung weren't perfect. They still had days when their conversations stumbled, when they misunderstood each other, when silence threatened to return, but they fought for each other now, not with noise, but with presence. One night, long after a concert, they found themselves in an empty stadium, sitting on the edge of the stage as crews packed up cables and lights. Taehyung looked out over the empty seats. "I used to wonder what would happen if we ever broke." Jungkook stared at the floor below. "We did." Taehyung nodded slowly. "But we're still here." Jungkook turned to him. "Do you think it'll always be like this, complicated?" Taehyung smirked. "Complicated means it matters." Jungkook smiled back. "Then I'm okay with that." The lights above them flickered once before shutting off completely, casting them in near darkness. But even in the dark, they didn't feel lost anymore. Because sometimes trust doesn't return in lightning. Sometimes it's rebuilt in whispers, in late-night walks, in hard conversations and second chances. Sometimes it takes a long time. But when it does come back, it stays, quietly, steadily, like two shadows walking side by side. The hotel hallway was quiet, lit only by the ambient glow of the wall sconces. Jungkook stood there for a long time after the door had closed behind Taehyung. He hadn't expected him to say anything more tonight, but something about the soft finality of their last exchange left his chest hollow. Trust is complicated. Taehyung had said it with a smile, but Jungkook knew better. Trust wasn't just complicated. It was fragile. It was memory-dependent. It was a house you had to rebuild with hands still trembling from the last time it collapsed. He exhaled slowly, leaning his forehead against the cold wall. Down the corridor, muffled laughter and distant footsteps came and went. Life continued. The world spun. But for him, this moment felt like a pause between past and future, and he wasn't sure which side he was more afraid of. The next day, the group had a schedule. It was a recording for a variety show, something light, something humorous, something they had all mastered over the years, smiling through exhaustion, laughing on cue, knowing how to charm the camera no matter what weighed them down. But as the staff bustled around the set, adjusting lights and microphones, Jungkook felt his fingers twitch at the sight of Taehyung standing just a few meters away. He was laughing with Jimin, his eyes crinkling in that way fans adored, his body relaxed, leaning slightly to one side. But Jungkook knew the weight behind the posture. He recognized it because he'd worn it too. And even if they were better now, even if they had made space for healing, there were still fault lines beneath the surface. Still moments that tested them. "Positions, please," someone called. They lined up, seated on the colorful stage floor in a semicircle. Jungkook found himself next to Taehyung, not by request, just coincidence or maybe fate. Their knees almost touched. The air between them buzzed softly. A camera hovered in front of them, the red light blinking to life. The host began with jokes. The audience laughed. The energy in the room was high, but Jungkook's focus kept flicking sideways. Every time Taehyung spoke, every time he leaned in to comment, Jungkook's heart reacted like it hadn't quite forgotten how close they used to be. How natural it had once been to laugh without caution, to nudge him with an elbow, to whisper side comments between segments. Halfway through the show, the host pulled a card from the stack and grinned. A question from a fan: which member do you trust the most with a secret? The question landed like a stone in a still lake. The air shifted. Jungkook felt every pair of eyes subtly scan the group. He heard the hesitation in the laughter. The question wasn't malicious. It was innocent on the surface. But some questions cut deeper when they weren't meant to. Namjoon answered first, then Hoseok. Jimin made a joke. Yoongi kept it cryptic. Then it was Taehyung's turn. He looked straight ahead, his fingers resting gently on his lap. "I think," he said slowly, "trust is more than sharing secrets. It's about knowing that if you fall apart, the person you trust won't let you stay broken." The host tilted his head. "So, who's that person for you?" Taehyung didn't hesitate. He turned his head slightly. "Jungkook." It was simple, unadorned, and it struck like lightning. Jungkook blinked, caught in the unexpected warmth of the moment. His throat tightened. He wasn't sure if the cameras caught it. The way his fingers curled slightly into the fabric of his pants, the way his jaw clenched for just a beat too long, but inside something shifted. After the recording, as the others trickled out and thanked the crew, Jungkook found himself walking beside Taehyung toward the back hallway. The exit loomed ahead, but neither of them seemed in a hurry. "You didn't have to say that," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung looked at him. "I meant it." Jungkook stopped. So did Taehyung. They stood in the shadowed corridor just out of view of the main lights, the noise of packing up fatting behind them. "You still trust me?" Jungkook asked, voice barely audible. Taehyung studied his face. "I'm learning how to." Jungkook looked down. "I'm still learning how to deserve it." A pause. Taehyung smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're exactly where we need to be." That night Jungkook didn't sleep, not because of anxiety or restlessness, but because he couldn't stop thinking about how far they had come, how much they had fought, how close they had come to losing something that, for a long time, had felt unbreakable. He opened his phone, scrolling through old photos. There were so many of them. Him and Taehyung on tour buses, in hotel lobbies, at airports, in dressing rooms, smiling in ways they hadn't recently. He paused on one, Taehyung asleep on his shoulder, headphones in, the faintest smile on his lips. He sent it. No words. Just the photo. Minutes passed, then the screen lit up. Taehyung's reply came in 3 words. "I remember that." More minutes passed. Jungkook stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Finally he typed, "I want us to find that again." Taehyung's reply came slower this time. "We're on our way." The next few weeks weren't perfect. There were moments of awkwardness, moments where Jungkook still second-guessed himself before speaking, where Taehyung still held back without meaning to. But they were present now, intentional. They showed up for each other. They sat next to each other in cars again. They started writing lyrics together again. They found their rhythm not just in performances, but in life. One afternoon in the practice room, Jungkook looked up from reviewing choreography on the screen to find Taehyung watching him. Their eyes met, and instead of looking away, they smiled at the same time. No words, just understanding. Later that evening, Jungkook sat at the piano in the corner of the studio. The others had gone. The building was quiet. He played a few soft chords, something unformed, unfinished. Behind him, Taehyung's voice drifted in. "That new." Jungkook turned. "Just something I've been working on." "Can I hear it?" Jungkook nodded. "Sit." Taehyung crossed the room and sat beside him. Jungkook played. It was slow, mournful, hopeful all at once. When he stopped, Taehyung didn't speak for a while. Then softly he said, "Let's finish it together." Jungkook looked at him. "Really?" "Yeah," Taehyung said. "Let's write something honest, something real, not about what we were, not about what we lost, but about what we're becoming." And so they did. Night after night they stayed in the studio writing, sometimes in silence, sometimes in heated debate, sometimes in laughter. They poured everything into the song. The pain, the regret, the apology, the forgiveness, the hope. When it was done, they called it Still Here. They performed it once unannounced, at a small event meant to be casual. When they sang it, the room went still. No one moved. The lyrics told a story not just of them, but of every friendship tested by time, pride, and silence. When the song ended, Taehyung turned to Jungkook and nodded. Jungkook nodded back. And for the first time in a long time, the silence between them meant peace. Absolutely. "I will now begin writing the next long, immersive, emotionally rich continuation of your story, exactly in the style you requested. No breaks, no points, no labels, and purely cinematic narrative in English. Please allow a moment while I write the full next segment. It will pick up directly from the moment Jungkook and Taehyung performed Still Here. The last chord of the song still echoed softly in the room, dissolving into a silence that was far from empty. It lingered like mist, gentle, poignant, full of things too deep to name. Jungkook's fingers slowly released the piano keys, his chest rising with a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Taehyung stood beside him, one hand lightly gripping the mic stand, his eyes fixed on the crowd in front of them, yet not really seeing it. The applause came late, not from hesitation but from reverence. As if the audience had forgotten for a moment that clapping was allowed. The intimacy they just witnessed wasn't performance, it was confession. Afterward, the backstage hallway was dim, humming faintly with the buzz of exit lights and distant movement. Jungkook leaned against the cold wall, head tilted back, sweat still clinging to his temples. He could hear muffled voices in the dressing room ahead, Jimin laughing, Namjoon thanking the staff, Yoongi discussing the set list with the manager. But his attention stayed behind him, where Taehyung approached slowly, quietly, like he always had when something inside him wasn't ready to settle. They didn't speak for a moment. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Taehyung leaned beside him, their shoulders barely brushing. "That song," Jungkook said, voice rough from emotion and vocals. "It's the most honest thing I've ever put on a stage." "I know," Taehyung replied, his gaze resting forward. "It's the first time in a long time I felt like we were really singing together, not just beside each other." Jungkook turned his head slightly, searching Taehyung's face. "Do you think they knew?" "Everyone knew," Taehyung said with a faint smile. "You wore it in your voice, and I didn't look away this time." Jungkook swallowed, throat tightening again. "I was scared you would." "I almost did," Taehyung admitted. "But I realized something. The version of you I was hurt by that wasn't all of you. And the part I loved most, your honesty, it was always there, just buried." Jungkook looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think I even knew how to reach for you anymore." "But you did," Taehyung said. "Every time you showed up, every time you didn't run." Their silence wasn't hollow anymore. It pulsed with life. They left together that night, walking under the muted city lights. Hands in their pockets, occasionally glancing at each other as if to confirm this wasn't a dream stitched together by tired hope. When they reached the corner near the dorms, Jungkook paused. "I don't want us to lose this again," he said. Taehyung's breath fogged in the night air. "Then don't let go." Jungkook nodded, simple and sure. "I won't." From that night on, something quietly transformed. They didn't declare it to the world. There were no grand social media posts, no viral behind-the-scenes clips designed to showcase reconciliation. Instead, it was in the details. The way they passed each other water bottles in rehearsals without needing to ask. The way they began harmonizing during vocal practice, unprompted, like muscle memory returning after a long injury. The way they sometimes found each other's gaze across the stage, and this time held it. One afternoon, while shooting a concept trailer for the upcoming album, they found themselves alone during a break. The set was extravagant, an abandoned theater dimly lit, the dust in the air catching stray rays of gold through broken curtains. Jungkook sat on the edge of the stage, legs swinging slowly, lost in thought. Taehyung walked in, sipping from a thermos, and for a moment just watched him in silence. Jungkook sensed the presence and didn't startle. He looked over his shoulder. "This place feels like a memory." Taehyung joined him, sitting close. "Maybe because we've spent years performing like the stage was the only place we knew how to talk." "Were we pretending?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung thought for a moment. "No, I think we were trying. And sometimes trying means pretending until it stops feeling fake." Jungkook smiled faintly. "You always know how to put it into words." "No," Taehyung said, his gaze fixed forward. "But you give me reasons to find the words." They sat there until the director called them back, but neither rushed. Because in that brief stillness, they weren't idols or performers or even best friends trying to rebuild a bridge. They were just two people learning what it meant to trust again. The day the album was released, Still Here was track number 11. Not a title track, not a single, but the one that spread through fans like wildfire. They dissected every lyric, every harmony, every pause between lines. Some said it was about growing up. Others said it was about grief. But most understood it was about two voices finding each other after being lost in the same silence. A week later, during an interview, they were asked a direct question. Is Still Here about the bond between you two? They didn't hesitate. Jungkook glanced at Taehyung. Taehyung smiled first. Yes, Jungkook said. It's about understanding that sometimes people drift, not because they stop caring, but because they're afraid. And it's about choosing to come back, Taehyung added, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. You've both grown a lot. Taehyung looked at Jungkook again. We're still growing, but we're not growing apart anymore. After the cameras stopped rolling and the crew began packing up, Jungkook leaned in. Do you regret how everything played out? Taehyung considered it. I regret the pain, not the lesson. I wish I had told you sooner, Jungkook said. Taehyung placed a hand on his shoulder. You're telling me now. That night back at the dorms, Jungkook opened his notebook, the one he hadn't dared to write in during the worst months. He flipped to a fresh page and wrote one line. Some bonds don't break. They just bend until you're strong enough to hold them again. He didn't send it, didn't post it, just left it there between the pages like a quiet promise to himself. In the months that followed, life returned to its chaotic rhythm. New albums, world tour, brand deals, late nights, early flights, but beneath it all there was steadiness again, between them. One morning, as they waited for the van, Taehyung tossed Jungkook a pack of honey candies, his favorite. I saw them at the cafe, Taehyung said casually. Jungkook caught it, grinning. Thanks. No big deal. But it was. Because the real healing, the real trust, wasn't in the grand moments. It was in that, in remembering someone's favorite candy, in sitting through late-night edits without snapping, in reaching for each other when it was easier to pull away. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was what it meant to stay quiet, not from fear or avoidance, but from peace. Because now, when Taehyung talked about trust, Jungkook didn't flinch. He listened. And finally, he understood. The rain came without warning. Fine at first, like dust floating on the late spring air, then heavier, soaking through his sleeves as Jungkook stood at the edge of the rooftop, staring at the city below. Soul blurred beneath a sheet of silver, lights dimmed by water, the world temporarily softened. He didn't move, didn't flinch. The droplets ran down his neck, cold against his spine, but he welcomed it. He welcomed the quiet, the cleansing. Behind him, the rooftop door creaked open. Taehyung didn't say anything. He just walked over, the sound of his boots echoing in the downpour, muted but certain. He stopped beside Jungkook and looked out over the same skyline, his hair slowly curling at the ends from the rain, strands dark against his temples. They stood like that for minutes, maybe longer, the storm washing over them. It's the same rain, Taehyung finally murmured, but it doesn't feel the same anymore. Jungkook turned to him, water clinging to his lashes. Why? Because the last time we stood in the rain like this, Taehyung said, we weren't speaking. Jungkook's breath caught. He remembered it too, how silence had felt like punishment, how even the rain hadn't been enough to drown the ache of distance. But now, Taehyung continued, his voice barely above the sound of falling water, it feels like peace. Jungkook exhaled, slow and deep. I was afraid to hope for that. Taehyung tilted his head slightly, and now, I think I finally believe it. They stayed out until they were drenched, until the city lights flickered on below them one by one like stars returning to the earth. When they went back inside, dripping and breathless, the manager nearly shouted, but then stopped mid-sentence upon seeing their faces. Neither said a word. They didn't have to. Something had settled, something had begun. In the following days, there was movement, not rushed, not forced, but deliberate. During interviews, Jungkook no longer waited for permission to speak beside Taehyung. He did so naturally, confident not only in his voice but in how it would be received. Taehyung, in turn, began referencing moments they'd shared, unafraid now to acknowledge the journey that had led them back. Their fans felt it. In fancams, in photo edits, in threads filled with nothing but screenshots of glances, of side smiles, of space that once separated and now welcomed. And then there was the trip. A short break in schedules allowed for a rare moment of spontaneity. No cameras, no makeup, just 2 passports, 1 plane ticket each, and a destination far from the demands of city life. They chose a coastal town, quiet, windswept, forgotten by most. The kind of place where the sea whispered and the stars didn't have to compete with skyscrapers. Their rented cottage was modest. A wooden deck, 2 small bedrooms, windows that faced the ocean. On their first night there, neither of them slept. They sat on the deck wrapped in blankets, watching the tide roll in. "I forgot what this felt like," Jungkook said quietly. "What?" Taehyung asked. "Stillness, like the world isn't expecting anything from me." Taehyung leaned back, his hair a mess from the salty air. "That's what I missed most about us. The way we used to be quiet together, not because we had nothing to say, but because it didn't need to be said." Jungkook nodded, his eyes on the waves. "It's strange. I used to think silence was the thing that broke us, but maybe it's what's healing us now." Taehyung reached over and poured them both warm tea from the thermos they'd brought out. He handed one to Jungkook, their fingers brushing. "I think silence only hurts," he said, "when it's hiding something." The steam curled between them like smoke from a fire long extinguished. They stayed in that town for 3 days. They walked along the shore, barefoot and half awake from dreams that clung to them well past morning. They ate at a small restaurant where no one recognized them, where the owner brought them extra kimchi just because. They slept late, watched old movies in silence, and once, without speaking, began humming the same melody from Still Here, unaware that they'd been thinking of it at the same time. On the final night, Jungkook sat at the window of the cottage, sketching lyrics into his notebook. Taehyung approached, sat beside him, and leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" he asked. Jungkook tilted the page toward him. Taehyung read slowly, eyes tracing each line. "No lights above, no crowd to face. Just you, the sea, this quiet place. No lines to read between us now. Just truth, just peace, just somehow." Taehyung looked at him. "Is it a song?" Jungkook shook his head. "It's a promise." They returned to Seoul changed, not as different people, but as people who remembered who they were before fear made them forget. And when they stood on stage weeks later, this time in front of thousands, the air was different, charged, certain. They sang together like they had done 1,000 times, but there was something in the way they harmonized now that no microphone could capture. It was trust, not perfect, not without its bruises, but real. After the encore, they stood side by side, sweat glistening, hearts pounding. Taehyung turned to Jungkook and said, "Without the mic, without the cameras, still here." Jungkook met his eyes, still here. And for the first time in what felt like years, there was nothing left to explain. The sky above Seoul had started to fade into that soft, purple indigo hue of early evening, the kind of quiet twilight that felt like the world was holding its breath before nightfall. The concert had ended hours ago, but the arena still echoed with memory, of voices lifted in unison, of lights flaring like 1,000 suns, of 2 silhouettes caught in a moment no one could fake. Taehyung sat alone in the dressing room now, the cheers still faint in his ears like a lullaby. His jacket hung loosely from one shoulder, his stage makeup only half removed, smudges of liner beneath his eyes like a worn-out painting. But he didn't move. His body was still riding the come-down of adrenaline, but his heart was somewhere else. The knock on the door came quietly. Jungkook didn't wait for an answer. He stepped inside, still in his black rehearsal shirt, damp with sweat, curls flattened against his forehead. Their eyes met, and for a moment nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. Jungkook crossed the room slowly, quietly. Then he sat down beside Taehyung on the worn leather couch, close but not intrusive, knees almost touching. "Do you remember our first stage together?" Jungkook asked softly, voice scratchy from hours of singing. Taehyung's lips twitched at the memory. "You were so nervous, you forgot the lyrics in rehearsal." "You kicked me under the table," Jungkook said with a faint smile. "Hard. You deserved it." They both laughed, real, quiet laughter that curled into the corners of their mouths like smoke in winter. Then came the silence again, but this time it was thick with warmth. Jungkook shifted, gaze dropping to his hands. "Tonight, when you looked at me, I felt it again. That thing we used to have, that unspoken rhythm, like I could fall and you'd be right there before I hit the ground." Taehyung turned toward him, eyes unreadable. "That's because I would be." Jungkook's throat tightened, even after everything. Taehyung didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, fingers interlocked. The dim lights above them reflected off the sweat still on his skin. "I've thought a lot about the past, about where things went wrong, how we both stopped talking, stopped reaching." He looked up at Jungkook, "But I never stopped wanting to find our way back." Jungkook blinked hard, willing away the sting in his eyes. "Neither did I." There was a long pause before Taehyung whispered, "Then let's stop standing on the edge of it." Jungkook nodded, chest rising with something that felt like relief, like release. Later that night, back at the dorms, it rained again. The windows were fogged and the thunder was distant, soft, rolling like a memory unfolding in the distance. Most of the members had retreated to their rooms, exhausted, but Jungkook stood in the kitchen, staring at the drip of raindrops down the glass. He didn't hear Taehyung enter until his voice cut through the quiet. "Still awake?" Jungkook glanced over, couldn't sleep. Taehyung opened the fridge, pulled out 2 bottles of water, and handed one over without looking. They stood there like that for a while, the fluorescent light casting a pale blue over their faces, highlighting the angles, the years etched into their skin from everything they'd lived through, not just as idols but as people. "You ever wonder," Taehyung said quietly, "what would have happened if we never made it through that?" Jungkook didn't hesitate, "All the time." "I think I would have missed you," Taehyung admitted, "not just on stage but here like this." Jungkook looked down. "I wouldn't have been the same person." Taehyung turned to him then. "You're still you, Jungkook." "No," Jungkook whispered. "I'm better because you made me face the parts of myself I kept hiding." Taehyung's gaze held his. "And you reminded me how to listen, even when it hurt." The next morning the group had no schedules. For the first time in months, the dorm was filled with the sound of nothing, just quiet footsteps, soft humming, occasional yawns. Jungkook stepped out onto the balcony with his coffee, wearing Taehyung's old hoodie that still smelled faintly of cedar and cologne. He didn't ask if he could borrow it. He just wore it. A moment later, the balcony door slid open. Taehyung emerged with a guitar slung over his shoulder and sat on the wooden bench beside him. "I wrote something," he said casually, tuning the strings. Jungkook raised a brow. "When?" "Last night." Taehyung began to play, a soft, aching melody that wrapped around the morning air like the last warmth of a dying ember. Jungkook closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. When Taehyung sang, it wasn't for performance. It was for him. The lyrics weren't perfect, but they were honest. "You were the silence I couldn't unhear, the shadow behind me, the voice in my fear. But now you're the rhythm that finds me again. A hand on my shoulder, a note in the rain." Jungkook opened his eyes slowly. "We should record that." Taehyung nodded. "Only if we do it together." They did. The studio became their sanctuary again. They didn't tell the company. They didn't post any teasers. They just created one track, then another, some raw, some haunting, all real, no masks, no embellishments, just two voices trying to tell the story they had lived. When they released the mini project quietly online, no promo, no announcement, fans knew immediately. It trended within minutes. The reactions weren't explosive, they were intimate, like everyone had been waiting for this healing without realizing it. And in the midst of it all, Jungkook and Taehyung kept writing. Not just music, but messages left on each other's mirrors. Coffee cups passed without a word. Notes slipped into pockets on tour. Jungkook found one on a flight to LA, Taehyung's handwriting on a torn notebook page. Not all broken things need fixing. Some just need time to be loved again. He folded it carefully, tucked it into his wallet, kept it close. And when they stood together again under blinding lights, before the roar of tens of thousands, they didn't have to perform the bond anymore. Because it wasn't performance. It was presence. It was breath. It was a second chance that had grown, patiently, in the shadow of silence. And now it was finally theirs.